Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, I am so excited to introduce my guest today, Jennifer Fondrevay. Jennifer is the founder and chief humanity officer of Day One Ready, a consultancy that advises forward-thinking business leaders, owners, and C-suite executives on how to prepare for and manage the people challenges of business transitions, particularly mergers and acquisitions. As a Fortune 500 C-suite survivor, quote unquote, of 3 separate multi-billion-dollar acquisitions, Jennifer authored the satirical Survivor's Handbook, Now What? A Survivor's Guide of Thriving Through Mergers and Acquisitions. With over 70 reviews, Now What? Became a #1 new release on Amazon when it was launched in November 2019. She shares her expertise as a contributor to Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Inc., Forbes, and Thrive Global. Jennifer is a frequent podcast guest and keynote speaker for conferences and associations and has advised numerous small to mid-market as well as Fortune 1000 companies, including Express Scripts, Cigna, Livongo, and Teladoc, to support their workforces in navigating the emotional journey of business transitions and post-M&A deal integration. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer Fondrevay. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hi, Tammy. Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. I know that you have a lot to share with us today on Work from the Inside Out. And as you know, Work from the Inside Out is all about the journeys that we've taken in our lives and our careers. We all started somewhere. Take us back to some of your earlier years and how those times might have been formative in terms of where you are today.
What's funny, it wasn't really, Tammy, until you asked me that question that I was taken back to my childhood. So it's very fun to do. I wish we got to do that more often in work, right? I was fortunate in that my father was French and my grandmother lived with us when I was really little. So essentially from the time I was born to 3 years old, so before my sister was born. And the benefit of that was that I learned French before I learned English.
Oh.
And so I have to confess, my original goal was to be ambassador to France. That's what I wanted to be. Now, my dad, who is still alive and lives in Spain, just thinks I'm sure taking the circuitous path. He still thinks that ambassadorship is a possibility. So, and that honestly guided so much of what I did as a kid. I wanted to go to Thunderbird, went to Thunderbird, American Graduate School of International Management, went in with the intent of becoming ambassador to France. But I came out as a marketing and advertising expert. And so went right into marketing and advertising as my first career. But it's just funny because it all started with me wanting to be ambassador to France.
But you really took that into college. You know, you hear about some kids who dream of something. Like, for example, when I was a little kid, I used to say to my parents or my grandparents, I'm going to be the first Jewish lady president. You know,
everything's possible when you're a kid. That's why it's wonderful that you took me back there.
Yeah. So, you know, but the fact is you went off to college, university, still with that dream in mind.
Oh, absolutely. So I went to undergrad was University of Illinois. At the time, they did not have international relations as part of their curriculum. So I created my own, what I considered to be relevant. I majored in poli-sci and French as my majors. So I got a double major and a minor in marketing.
Wow.
And then took that to Thunderbird graduate school. And it's just very funny because I'm very involved in Thunderbird still, and to U of I as well. And I think they still think I could be ambassador someday. So I just have to make so much money that I'll invest it in a presidential candidate that I believe in, and he or she will appoint me the ambassador. So Tammy, fingers crossed. If that happens, when that happens, I'll come back on your show.
Right.
And we'll talk about it.
Right. Well, and I can then say, I knew you when.
Exactly.
There you go. So, and as somebody said, I don't know who, but never say never, right?
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
And think about all your experiences over the years in marketing and mergers and acquisitions. You probably had to behave like an ambassador.
Absolutely.
On occasions, right?
I actually have had more than one person. I think it's usually when they find out that I wanted to be an ambassador, but I have been told that my diplomacy skills are extraordinary.
Yeah. That's
in
great.
Advertising, your diplomacy skills come in handy, right? Because you're managing all your people internally, your creatives, your media, your account planners, as well as serving your client.
Right.
And then even in my marketing days, most definitely you're managing a lot of internal clients as well as your external customers.
Yeah.
And most definitely in mergers and acquisitions, my diplomacy skills were at full tilt.
Wow. So by the time you got out of Thunderbird, though, you decided, no, I don't think so. I think I'll go this other route. What made that shift for you?
Thankfully, I had a very astute professor who asked me, I think it was my second semester, and said, so Jennifer, what are you hoping to do? He was a marketing professor. And I said, well, I'm going to be ambassador to France. And he said, oh, and he paused. And he looked at me, and you could almost see like, well, she could, she tends to be very pushy, very tenacious. But he said, but so that's a very laudable goal. He said, what's your fallback plan? And I said, well, I really enjoy marketing. And he said, I think that would be an excellent fallback. He said, you have an affinity for marketing and for understanding people and connecting and appreciating culture and brand identity and everything all wrapped up into that. So I thank that professor many times over, because thanks to him, I had a very legitimate fallback plan.
Yeah. Yeah. So clearly you did go to your fallback plan. Finish that, your master's.
Yeah. And at Thunderbird, they had at the time a very unique program. Now multiple colleges offer it, called International Advertising.
Oh.
And there were 4 teams. I think you had 5 people on the team, and you were given by a legitimate company. So in my case, it was Hershey. Hershey company wanted to launch Reese's peanut butter cups into the UK. And people in the UK tend to hate peanut butter. And so it was a big task. How do you launch a product that contains a key ingredient that most people despise in the country? So anyway, long story short, advertising executives came and judged the competition. And if you did well, you had the benefit of interviewing with a lot of different ad agencies. And so I interviewed with J. Walter Thompson.
Oh, and,
wow. I interviewed with a number of agencies, but was really thrilled. J. Walter Thompson is a great agency, considered the first ad agency, and just great for when you're first going into advertising, to have had the benefit of a multinational ad agency as your first experience.
Mm-hmm. So let me make sure I get this. So this was this a project to try to come up with a compelling case to introduce Reese's peanut butter cups to the UK, or were they really trying to introduce Reese's peanut butter cups to the UK?
They were. It was a legitimate project.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember. So we were sponsored by Hershey. I think Taco Bell was another team. I'm trying to remember all the other teams. I think even Wall Street Journal. I mean, fortunately, we had a lot of just diverse projects, and each project, the intent was come up with what's the unique selling proposition.
Yeah.
And what's the campaign? How would you launch this in the country?
Yeah.
Amazing experience.
I bet.
For a graduate school student to get firsthand. It's very different to read about marketing and do marketing research and textbooks and take tests versus living, breathing it.
Right. Right.
And just really invaluable experience.
So did they actually use your campain in the UK?
They ultimately decided not to launch Reese's Peanut Butter Cups into the UK. Well, again, I think the taste profile was, I think probably the biggest reason. But it was a ton of fun. They really liked the campaign that we came up with.
Yeah.
But no, it was not pursued.
Oh, I'm sorry. But but I learned a new thing. I never knew that the British didn't like peanut butter. That's an interesting piece of information. So, J. Walter Thompson, great agency, great experience. And, I get the feeling that you went into all of this, your education, everything, even though you had your eye on the prize, French ambassadorship, it sounds like you went after everything with a sense of energy and gusto. You had a lot of, it sounds like you had a lot of confidence, a lot of gusto when you went after things.
Yeah. And I think that probably is the biggest life lesson that I would pass on is because listen, I as I joked at the beginning, my goal was originally ambassador to France, but then you have different opportunities. Life presents different things to you. I'm thankful I gravitated to marketing, did well in that, and was open to new experiences. And I think that openness and that desire to just keep learning and moving forward really has been the common thread through everything.
Yes, absolutely. So, tell us more. Tell us more about about your journey from there.
So I spent 15 years in advertising. Again, thankful that I had the benefit of working with multinational agencies, J. Walter Thompson, Foote, Cone & Belding. And I went client side with a company called Navtech, digital maps. Now that's ubiquitous. Everyone, on your phone, you just automatically can pull up a map. But when I joined them in 2005, maps were not ubiquitous. They were not automatically in your phone.
Right.
If you remember, there were personal navigation devices.
Right.
You'd see them on the bottom shelf at Radio Shack, right? Or you could remember rental car agencies? You could rent a navigation GPS finder.
Right.
Now,
right.
Now pretty much everyone has it in their phone, but back then that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And that was truly my dream job. Loved working with Navtech. I moved abroad, dragged my husband and 2 kids, and essentially helped build out the marketing for Navtech in Europe. Because if you think about in Europe in particular, when you're traveling from country to country, all the different languages, it's hard to pull over to the gas station and ask somebody for directions. They may not speak your language.
Right.
And so maps were much further along in terms of adoption in Europe. And so it was an enormous opportunity to really craft what's that go-to-market strategy and plan.
Yeah.
And then continue to do that globally. So it was just an amazing company. And we were acquired by Nokia in 2008. So that was the first of 3 M&A experiences that I had. And it was that after that first one that I had the idea to write my book.
So it was after the first one that you thought about writing the book.
Yes. But as we know, Tammy, there's a big difference between having the idea to write the book and then actually writing it.
Absolutely. Well, we know the book launched in November 2019. So
Yep.
you did have a few years in between, and we know that you had a few other M&As in between. So,
Right.
So clearly you had more research time for the book.
I did. And what I would say is after that first one, so we were acquired, and it was a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, $9 billion. The next company that I went to, I was brought in by the acquiring company to manage the marketing team that they had inherited from the acquisition. And in that role, I knew how they felt. I had been in their shoes. And so being a leader who had gone through an acquisition and who knew the emotional aspect of it made me a better leader of that team. And so I worked with other leaders, sales leaders who even said, it's different when you're going through an acquisition. How do you keep people motivated? How do you keep them productive and focused? And so it was in that second M&A experience that I thought, wow, I really should write a book, because now I've seen both sides, and I've seen how crippling it can be if you don't understand the emotional aspect.
Right.
And then in the third acquisition experience that I was a part of, private equity had acquired the firm that I was working with. And at that point, I was very calm because I knew the playbook. And what people remarked was, wow, you seem so calm. And I said, because I know how this plays out. I've been on both sides. I've seen what's going to be expected, and it pretty much played out the way I had expected it to. And so it was at that point that I thought, okay, I really should write a survivor's handbook so that people have better visibility on what to expect.
And yet, well, it's interesting. And clearly there are certain things that happen to some degree the same way, but you hear stories about, sort of more hostile takeovers, whereas there are other, mergers that are more gradual. And yet there's always the stories you hear about all the mixed signals that people get, that one day they are told they have a job for another year. Then the next thing you know, they're being laid off. So there's all those things that happen at the sort of the ground level, the employee level. But then there's, of course, all the other things that happen, at the operations and the systems levels, and then the branding levels and all the other.
Sounds like you've been through one, Tammy, or certainly have know folks who have gone through it.
I've coached people through it. I have not personally been through it myself, but certainly have coached a lot of clients who have either been immersed in these things or have been survivors of these situations. And
so you've seen firsthand the emotional aspect and what it can do to people's confidence.
Oh, it's absolutely. It's an overnight thing. I mean, somebody who's devoted themselves, let's say, to a company, and let's say they've even risen through the ranks. They've maybe been promoted a few times. They've really given, their heart and soul to the work, or maybe not even their heart and soul, but they've been invested. And then there's all, then the announcement comes and they didn't even know it was coming.
Right.
The blindsided kind of announcement. And they don't know whether they're going to be there tomorrow or not. And of course, the minute an announcement comes, I don't have to tell you this, but if nobody had a clue that this was coming, then of course the mistrust is in the air, right?
Right. And that's one of the key. Well, I try and paint a picture in my book, and then in the speaking and consulting that I do, I paint that picture, what those emotions are that people go through. I think the tendency is to talk about the S curve, the change curve, which completely understand, right? That there's an arc of what an organization goes through change and transition. I found, though, as someone who experienced the emotions, particularly in that first one firsthand, it's more the stages of grief that you go through.
Yeah.
And it was when I had a conversation with a grief counselor who I was talking to for the book, and she said, mourning or grief is is a sense of mourning. You're mourning the future that won't be.
Yeah.
And I thought that's exactly what it feels like, because in your career, you tend to work towards a goal. You're working towards more responsibility, a different title, maybe an expanded team, whatever. And suddenly overnight, all of that dissolves.
Right.
And you aren't clear now on what the future looks like. And so a big part of what I talk about is how to navigate those stages of grief, because you've lost your old company. And yet you're not sure what the new company is. You're not sure what that future is. And I have found in having that open discussion around the stages of grief, it's really helped people understand why they feel the way they do when they're going through that merger and acquisition, or just business transformation in general.
Yes. Yeah. So when people do have that understanding, how does that serve them in navigating that process?
A big part of it is getting to acceptance. It's the struggle we all have. If you've got the future that you knew, you deny. You can spend a lot of time in denial.
Yeah.
And I will say firsthand, I spent as many months as rationally could be possible in denial, because I loved the company that I was a part of, and I could see that it was changing. And to the point you made, I had flown 1 million miles. I was an active contributor to the culture, to the brand identity, to the marketing. And it was very difficult at first to say, okay, this is all changing. And it's why a big part of the theme, one of the key things in my book, and even just when I talk with executives, is you have to know your value. Understanding what your value is and how you can contribute that to the way forward, versus being fixated on your past achievements.
Right.
Because the company, post M&A or in any business transformation, they want to know, how are you going to contribute to the future? Right. They're less interested in what you did in the past.
Right.
And so that, I'll say, epiphany for me is what drove so much of it's why I decided this book is worth it.
Yeah.
Having, helping executives have that understanding. Because our tendency, all of our natural tendency, is to be proud of our past achievements.
Yeah.
But with change happening so frequently, the bigger play is, what's my value? What are my unique contributions? And how can that be applied to the way forward, the new success metrics?
Right. We're recording this conversation in the middle of the pandemic. And so everyone, the word uncertainty comes up in every other sentence in conversations these days.
Yes.
But the fact is, the world's always been uncertain. And when we talk about things like mergers and acquisitions, there's a huge amount of uncertainty that comes up. So, when you're in the middle of a merger, unless you are one of the key negotiators in that process, and even sometimes the people who are
Exactly.
one of the leaders in the middle of that process, they even can get the rug pulled out from under them. I mean, it's almost like nobody's really safe in total situation, especially if you're the one being acquired. We've seen that happen where someone thinks that they're going to have an ongoing role, or they've been promised an ongoing role, like a CEO or someone in the C-suite. And then, a few months into it, it's like, no, we don't need you anymore. Here's a check. Have a good life.
Right. And that's actually when I was asked, so who are you writing this book for?
Yeah.
I said, for me, I'm writing the book for those people who aren't in the room when the deal is made, but they're burdened with the execution. Because everyone, to the point you just made, the future is uncertain. And as things shift, right? And I say this as someone who completely understands that a legitimate growth strategy is a merger and acquisition. It's how a company survives or grows or breaks into a new market. There are all of those benefits. The reason I do what I do is to try and help see that through, right? To help people stay productive, for people to understand the role that they can play, but also to be eyes wide open. And one of the best analogies that I think often helps people understand exactly what you just described is it's like musical chairs.
Yeah.
Sometimes when the music stops, you don't have a chair. Has nothing to do with you. It just, there isn't a chair.
Right.
And so you need to be clear in, again, your value, what your unique contributions can be.
Right.
And the clearer you are on that, the less it feels like body blows. The less you'll feel that soul sucking experience.
It almost makes me think a little bit about, what your professor suggested to you. Have a backup. Have a backup plan. And I know it sounds so simplistic now when you're talking about somebody who has had, let's say, a key leadership role in a company, and they've had a degree of power in that company, and then something like this happens, and whether or not they've been at the table when these decisions are made, that doesn't always mean that ultimately they are going to have control over their destiny at that company.
Right.
And so even if they want to, and I think that, when we think about the kinds of choices and decisions people have to make about making transitions in their careers, is there are certain things you have control over. There are certain things you don't have control over. It doesn't matter whether you're an individual contributor or whether you are the chief marketing officer or whatever role you're in. There is that place of, like you said, knowing your value and knowing where can you convey that, and whether it's, continuing to try to convey that in the context of the situation you're in that's in the middle of change, and or starting to have some conversations somewhere else to see where you're going to be able to fit in best.
Yeah, you reminded me, one of the stories in my book that I really think does a great job of capturing how you need to think about it. And it didn't happen to me. It was a woman who I interviewed who said she was in a team. She was a marketing specialist. And her focus was industry expertise. So she was very smart on what was happening in telecommunications. And her boss, shortly after the acquisition, brought the team together and said, listen, I don't know if they will consider us valuable in the integration. What I know is that we bring great value. And he said, but we don't have control over that. And so his advice to them was, don't fixate so much on your title. I'm the specialist in telecommunications. I'm the specialist in automotive. His advice was, focus on what your skill set is, your transferable skills and what you're good at. And he said, each of you is very smart on getting quickly up to speed on an industry, where the opportunities are, where the gaps are, how our products and solutions can serve, customers, individuals, et cetera. And he said, that's what you need to focus on and demonstrate that at every opportunity, how you do that. And she said it was such invaluable advice. And I completely agree. Because you're focused less on past achievements, focus less on your title, and you're staying in learning mode, and you're looking to, how do I apply what I know I'm good at towards the new mission? And so I just, and Tammy, as you highlighted with the pandemic, so many companies have learned the hard way the need to be agile, to be able to pivot quickly. And it's those employees who are able to pivot and there's been multiple pivots. You may just, strategies can change more than once. And so I think that whether we like it or not is going to be certainly for the short term, that resiliency and ability to pivot and fixate less on, here's my title, this is the responsibility I had. It's more about how do I stay in learning mode and continue to contribute my skills and my value.
Right. I think that's the way to go forward, period. But I think not to do it as if I'm dancing as fast as I can to show my value because I've got to prove myself constantly, but that there is something in that kind of, I think what goes along with that is something that you talked about earlier, your 15 years in advertising and how much you enjoyed staying open and curious and all the learning that you got out of that. And, there's a lot of upsides to that too, even if something that might have brought you to that was an uncomfortable experience or even a devastating experience. But I think as people go forward in their careers now, this is more the landscape and the picture that I think people are going to be looking at.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, what's so funny about even just as I listened to you talk, if you had asked me 3 years ago if I would walk away from being a chief marketing officer to become an entrepreneur, to start all over again, be a consultant who guides organizations and executives through the people challenges of mergers and acquisitions, never would have even been on my radar. When people say, oh, you wrote a book, have you always wanted to write a book? And I'll say, no. Do you know how hard it is to write a book? But it was a mission. It almost, I couldn't get the book idea to go away because I thought, if I don't put this in writing, I can't imagine more people suffering through it. And there's a lot of upside. There's great opportunity if you understand how to navigate the changes. Right. And the uncertainty. There's huge upside, but if no one's helping you understand that emotional journey and how to get through it. So, but to your point, it's being open to changes in your career. I think as long as you're always driven by how am I serving others? How am I leaving a mark on this planet? Yeah. It's always been my driver.
I agree. And that driver has served you well. So now it's been 3 years or less than 3 years since you hung up your entrepreneurial shingle.
Well, do we count 2020? You tell me.
Well,
I launched in January of 2018, and I'm still deciding whether 2020 counts or not.
I count 2020. For me, I think everyone gets to choose whether they count 2020 or not. I know I actually bought a whole case of wine that had it was really delicious wine, which is why I bought a whole case of it. But the wine was labeled 2020 is canceled.
Oh, I love that.
And someone gave me a bottle of it as a gift. And I loved it so much that I found the wine store that was selling it. And I was like, I got to get a whole case of this. And then I've been giving out as gifts to people sort of as a haha. But actually it was so delicious. I even went to go get another case and they ran out.
Oh, I love the name.
So for some people, 2020 was canceled. For me, it wasn't. It's been a very productive year, but anyway.
And to your earlier point, the key, I think, to surviving 2020 was just staying future focused.
Yes.
To not sit back and wait, see how things were going to play out. You only could get through 2020 if you just stayed future focused. And I would say it opened up my eyes to more possibilities. Previously, I was very focused in the merger and acquisition market.
Yeah.
But the same tools and techniques that I help companies and leaders for, how to manage the people challenges, I now work with companies and associations because it's how do you navigate uncertainty brought on by crisis? Mm-hmm. The previous crisis, not that M&A is a crisis, but the dramatic change was mergers and acquisitions. And now everyone's facing a crisis. We're facing it in different ways, but equally facing the uncertainty that comes with it. So for me, 2020 opened up my eyes to broader possibilities of how I could help organizations. And to your earlier point, you just have to stay open to that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have received that message had I not been open to, well, what I do to help companies, that applies to, companies who are facing uncertainty and change now.
Yeah.
And it's allowed me to help more people.
Yeah. And when it comes to the pandemic, nobody could have planned for this. Whereas with a merger and acquisition, there's at least some attempt to plan. Right. And even so, as those things go forward, things show up that you couldn't have necessarily planned on, but still has to be addressed. But it's addressed in the context of something that was planned. Whereas with the pandemic, everything's being addressed in the context of something that was never planned on. Well, I guess the public health officials did have some plans for a potential pandemic, but I think nobody really was quite prepared for this. So we can't compare a merger and acquisition to a pandemic. But at the same time, I think, like you said, a merger and acquisition is not necessarily a crisis, but everybody has their own tolerance for change. And so for some people, that's how they process it, right?
Yeah, to me, the common thread for both is in a merger and acquisition or what we face now, how you had envisioned your future changes.
Yes.
And you can't control it. You don't necessarily know how it's going to play out. And what I'm always trying to tell people is you have more control than you think you do in terms of how this plays out.
Right.
Same in a merger and acquisition, and similar to how we are facing things now. Now, granted, there's a lot of other variables that are at play that go beyond just the business, right? Do you have kids at home? Are you having to do homeschooling? Do you have parents who you're worried? Like, there's a lot more variables that I do not want to minimize. But I just, I do believe that's a big part of the message is you can, through your attitude, through your resilience, you can navigate this and get through it. There's more in your control than you think. And that's the message I'm continually trying to promote with executives and organizations, period, so that people can see the light.
Right. So was it the last acquisition that really perpetuated your pivot into entrepreneurial life?
I would love to say no. The last acquisition more just confirmed, okay, you need to spend time and write this book.
I see. Okay.
By the third one, I thought, because now I'd been through 3 and I'd seen all sides.
Right.
And same themes kept emerging. And when I started to interview people for the book, so I interviewed CEOs and CFOs and HR leaders and private equity. And consistently, I would get asked the question, well, what are you doing besides the book? This is really useful. I mean, these CEOs actually in particular said, I don't know if I've ever talked with anyone about the emotional aspect of this. Because there were CEOs and CFOs who I spoke to who had typically in the past been serial acquirers and suddenly got acquired and just realized, wow, I never knew how this felt. And so when they asked me, well, what are you doing besides the book? I'd say, well, do you know how hard it is to write a book? That's all my focus was at the time. I was interviewing for other marketing executive roles. And, one friend in particular, I said, well, I can't be a consultant. I make fun of consultants in the book. I say they're like swarms of locusts who descend on the company with spreadsheets and PowerPoint templates, right? And he said, well, be a good consultant.
Don't be one of those.
And so it was really in that moment that I started to more seriously entertain it. And then I will confess, Tammy, and I'm not necessarily proud of this because you don't want a health scare to kind of shake you up, but I had a health scare in the summer of 2017. I thought I had breast cancer, and it was really in that moment that, and I don't mean to sound morbid, but when you have your obit flash in front of you,
oh my God,
you're thinking, you're sitting in front of in the waiting room for whatever next test. And I thought I would be so disappointed in myself if my obit said, she was a great CMO. And not to say that, I had worked really hard toward that. I was very proud of what I had achieved, but I was juxtaposing that against the number of people that I could help better navigate what can be a very debilitating period in your career, and I wanted mergers and acquisitions to be more successsill. The 70 to 90% failure rate's been pretty consistent. And I thought, okay, if I could put a dent in that, then I would feel proud that I've achieved something. So after that, that was the summer of 2017, and I launched my business in January of 2018.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, you have an experience like that in your life that just brings things, to a head, so to speak. And you get real with yourself. We often do, Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I never planned to be an entrepreneur. So it's just very funny to me. Yeah. I enjoyed corporate life, but it was just a calling.
Yeah.
And an opportunity to bring what I considered expertise as someone who had survived it, navigated it. Let me help others do the same.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's been going well so far. So tell us a little bit more about the kinds of things that you are doing with executives and organizations.
It plays in a couple of ways. So one is helping executives who are coming together in a merger and acquisition, make sure that they're aligned. A lot of times, a merger and acquisition, the failure can happen because people think they're aligned when they're not. So a lot of work in working with private equity and then executives on both sides to be clear on what that vision is, that way forward, and then helping them craft that vision in a way that the workforce understands where they're going and can see how they can contribute. So that's a big part of it. I've been teased that I'm the M&A whisperer for a lot of presidents and CEOs who are, managing a merger and acquisition, because I will highlight, you'll always hire the lawyer, the accountant, your corporate development person, and I'm the human capital advisor, someone who can give them line of sight on, here's consistently what happens in a merger and acquisition. That was actually a theme of HBR article that I wrote, how to avoid us versus them thinking. Right. Two companies having different cultures, higher executives versus frontline leaders, and then who stays versus who goes. So I really help executives get smarter on not only what to expect, but then how to manage it and lead through it.
That's great.
And, for me, now, again, as a result of the pandemic, it's just helping more organizations navigate the stages of grief to identify what their workforce is going through, because they realize that the future that they had envisioned for themselves is no longer going to be. So I've broadened my speaking and consulting to help organizations big and small with their employees, to get through this period and see a way forward.
Wow. It sounds like if they could put you in a bottle and duplicate you, there's a lot of people who could use that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of, it's a catch-22, because I feel like I'm constantly a cheerleader for I have a lot of friends who are executives leading people through, and I'm sure, Tammy, you've been in a similar situation, right? You're helping coach them through that because you feel for them, and at the same time you want to give them the tools that they need to be leaders when they're just trying to figure out for themselves, how do I get through this?
Well, it's true. I mean, it's really there's a lot of people there. Yeah, there's a lot of people who feel like they're caught between a rock and a hard place, and they don't know where the rock is, and they don't even know where the hard place is, but they know they're there.
Yeah.
They're not really sure exactly where it is. It's a very unsettling, especially when you've reached a certain point in your career where you feel like you kind of know what you're doing most of the time.
Right.
And so you're in this position where all of a sudden you have all the responsibility still, and yet you really don't know what you're doing at that point.
And it's funny because that is one of the things definitely from the M&A consulting that I've done that applies to this, because in that merger and acquisition scenario, oftentimes executives are expected to lead their teams as the strategy is kind of being defined, or the strategy shifts and changes and goes in a different direction. And so as a leader, you're trying to figure out, okay, I'm trying to get clear on where we're going, and yet I've got to keep bringing my people along.
Right, because we still have a company to run at the same time, you know?
So you kind of got this dual role, you know, and you, particularly if you've been a leader who's been transparent, you want to continue to be transparent, but at the, in the back of your mind, you're like, I'm still figuring this out. So a lot of my consulting is to help leaders, manage that, their own emotions as well as lead their teams.
Yeah. Wow. This is amazing. This is great. I am enchanted, Jennifer, by all of this.
Thank you. You've got a very good radio voice. I think, Tammy, you should expand beyond podcasts. Just get on the airwaves.
Should I be like
very calming, very soothing?
Should I be like Fraser Crane?
Absolutely.
I'm listening. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I decided to do podcasting because over the years, several people from different parts of my life said to me, you should be in radio. And I'm like, what? Really? Huh? So I never really gave it a lot of thought. And then, when podcasting became a thing and I was trying to decide, do I do a podcast or should I blog? What should I do? And then I thought, well, a lot of people said they like hearing my voice. No one ever likes hearing their own voice, but I thought, okay, I'll give this podcasting thing a try.
I'm glad you got that early encouragement. It's a lovely voice. I'm probably more attuned to it. My audiobook comes out March 10th. And so I've just spent a lot of time in a studio because I wanted to record it.
Yeah.
And fortunately, same thing. I had a lot of people say, you should record it because your book is so much your voice.
Yeah.
But it definitely has had me attuned to how you enunciate.
Yes.
And how you pull people into your stories. So I can see why you've been a successful podcaster, Tammy.
Oh my goodness, Jennifer, go on. Keep going. Well, listen, before we wrap up here though, there's so much about what you're talking about here that really ties beautifully in with just the way people go about transitions and making important decisions in their lives. I think mergers and acquisitions probably, is in some ways probably at an extreme end of the kinds of career transitions people have to make, because things happen somewhat rapidly and yet somewhat covertly in some ways. Mm-hmm. And it's a different dynamic. But, based on your experience of having made several transitions, both as a result of M&As, but also some transitions in your own experience from advertising to more in the marketing arena, what would be a key piece of advice you would give somebody who is thinking about making a significant transition?
I think really it's the underlying theme of our discussion. The clearer you are in your value and the more open you are to just always staying in learning mode and having that willingness to just keep moving forward. For me, all three aspects, and I say this as someone who I wasn't always that way. I thought my value was one thing, and I stayed fixated on that and struggled as the company pivoted and changed and moved in a different direction. So I learned the hard way, knowing your value is what are the skills, what are the unique things that I can contribute to this company moving forward. And if I don't think I can contribute, then where do those skills matter? Where's the next company that can do that? The clearer you are on that for yourself, the better you're able to navigate all the change and uncertainty that's going to continue to come. As you highlighted, it's now part of our career.
It definitely is.
And something we have to embrace. So the more agile you can be and willing to pivot, serves you best.
Yeah. And how can people learn more about you and your work? Where can they find you?
So my website, jenniferjfondrevay.com. Okay. I'm very active on LinkedIn as well. So I'd love to connect with people on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So again, Jennifer Fondrevay on LinkedIn. And my book is available on Amazon, as you noted. It's called Now What. If you put Now What Jennifer Fondrevay, you'll find it.
Right.
And I have an audiobook that comes out in March that I'm very excited about.
Exciting. Well, and all of this will be in the show notes. So people will easily be able to find the links to everything that we've talked about here. So,
thank you.
Jennifer,
and thank you for asking. I will say the book is a short read. It's illustrated.
Oh, great.
And it's humorous. You know, who in his right mind would want to read a book about M&A unless they thought it would have the dark humor of mergers and acquisitions? And really the theme of the book is just navigating transition. So
that's great. I love that, because I think I would encourage listeners, even if you are not in the middle of a merger and acquisition, I think there's a lot of value in what Jennifer is offering here in terms of any kind of transition, because a lot of what we talked about here applies to all kinds of transitions that people go through. So go out and get her book.
And you were my 50th review, remember?
That's right.
On my path to 100. So
that's right. Absolutely. I know. I'm number 50. Yay. So again, Jennifer, thank you so much for being here. This was delightful.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Jennifer Fondrevay. It was so interesting to speak with her to learn about her personal and professional journey. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you are interested in any of the resources or links mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them on the blog page of my website at www.tammygoulerloeb.com. Just look for episode 125. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Or perhaps you're just feeling a little stuck? Get specialized group and individualized support, insights, and accountability from a brilliant mix of professional women in a safe, non-judgmental creative space. Join one of my small hybrid mastermind coaching groups starting on a rolling basis. You can learn more at https://bit.ly/navigating career change. If you were inspired by this episode with Jennifer, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd love to read your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find through my website at www.tammygoulerloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcast button and follow the instructions provided there. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.tammygoulerloeb.com. www.workfromtheinsideout.com.